Hey, what's up guys? This video is for section 2-4, which is solving equations. Now this is the big one because it says with variables on each side. So what that means is we are going to have to use all three steps in solving equations to isolate the variable. So let's go ahead and review what those steps are. Let's look at step number one. Here it says to simplify each side of the equation and get all the variables on one side or on the same side. Now to do that, we are going to use the distributive property. We are going to combine like terms, and that's what we're going to do today. We're going to distribute and combine like terms. If we have fractions, we can cancel the fractions, so it makes the equations a little bit easier. And we must get all the variables on the same side. Now that's step number one, which is a lot of things to do, but once you do that, you can solve for the variable a lot easier. So step number two, you want to eliminate the constant on the same side of the variable. So we are going to use the inverse operations for adding and subtracting. And step number three, you must isolate the variable. And to do that, we are going to use the inverse operation for multiplying and dividing. Remember that the goal is to get the variable by itself. So that's what we want. We want x or the y or p or m, whatever variable you guys have, by itself. Now these equations here, they don't have fractions, but if you guys pay attention to the equations, we do have variables or a variable on the left side and on the right side of the equation. So here we have a 7n on the left side, 5n on the right side, 4b on the left side, 3b on the right side, 7x on the left side, and x on the right side. So let's go ahead and look at this one first. We want to get n by itself. So what that means, the number one, we want to simplify each side of the equation. So I'm going to show you the line under the equal sign. On the left side, if you pay attention to this expression, 7n minus 2, they're not like terms, so we cannot simplify. We don't have fractions. We don't have to cancel any fractions, or we don't have to distribute because there's no parentheses. On this side, same thing. They're not like terms, we cannot simplify, but we do have n, 5n on the right side and 7n on the left side. So we want to get the n's by on one side. Now it doesn't matter what side you want the variable on, you just want a variable on the left side or the right side. So what I tell my students is, you always look for the smallest number with the variable, the smallest coefficient. So I'm looking at the ones with the variable 7n and 5n. Well, 5 is smaller than 7. So I look at the smallest coefficient with the variable and I do the opposite of that coefficient. So we do have a positive 5n, so I'm going to do a minus 5n right here and a minus 5n over here. So when I have that, look what happens. Right here, the 5n and the minus 5n, they're going to cancel because they're opposite from each other. Just like if you have 5 apples and you take away 5 apples, we have 0 apples. And on the other side, you guys are going to combine 7n and the minus 5. Now those you can subtract. So 7n minus 5n, that's going to be 2n. So let me bring down the 2n. And notice that I put the minus 5n underneath the 7n because those are like terms. This one doesn't have an n, so that's why I don't put a minus 5n on the bottom. And this one actually cancels. So let's go ahead and bring everything down because we can bring down the minus 2n right here. And on the other side, well, we know the 5n and the minus 5n cancels, but we do have a positive 6. So you bring that one down. Notice what happens to the equation. We only have one n on the left side. Doesn't matter what side it is, you can have it on the left side or the right side. Just make sure that you guys follow the steps. And on the other side, we have a constant or a number, but we also have a minus 2, a constant over here. So now we can go to step number 2. Step number 2, you want to eliminate the constants on the same side of the variable. So I am going to add 2 to both sides because that's the opposite of minus 2. And I'm going to cancel these two right here. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. I bring down the 2n on the left side, and on the other side I combine those two numbers. 6 plus 2 is 8. And finally you can move on to step number 3. Step number 3, you isolate the variable. And these two are multiplying because there's nothing in between. 2n is 2 times n. So the opposite of multiplication is division. So I'm going to divide by 2. And remember to keep that balance in an equation. Whatever you do to one side, you have to do it to the other side. So this right here will become a 1. 2 divided by 2 is positive 1. We don't need it. You just bring down the n, bring down the equals, and we have 4 as our answer. Now this one is the same idea. You guys want to get the variables on one side. Notice that we don't have fractions, so we're not going to cancel fractions. We don't have parentheses, we cannot distribute, and these are not like terms. 3b minus a are not like terms. So I'm looking at the coefficient with the variable 4b, and there's a 3b over here. So the smallest one is 3b. So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to subtract 3b, and I'm going to go to the other side and I'm going to subtract 3b. And notice I align the ones that are like terms, the ones with the b. So when I do this, I'm going to have 1b. 4b minus 3b is 1b. So I'm just going to put a b. I don't need that 1 next to the b. I'm going to bring down the plus 2. That one didn't cancel. It didn't, nothing happened to that number. And on the other side, this cancels right here, and you bring down the minus 8. Then you go to step number 2. Step number 2, you get rid of the constants on the same side of the variable. There's the variable b. So I'm going to do the opposite of plus 2, minus 2 on both sides. So this right here will cancel, plus 2 minus 2. You bring down the b, equals negative 10 on the right side, because you guys combine, they have the same sign. You add the numbers and keep the sign. So negative 10. B doesn't have anything on the left side, doesn't have coefficient, it doesn't have a negative, so that means it's by itself. So the answer is B equals negative 10. And let's try one more when we have variables on both sides. So I have my line under the equal sign here, and I'm going to look at the coefficients of the variables, 7x, and this one has a 1 in front of the x. It has an invisible 1. So let me put the 1 right there so you guys know it is an invisible 1, and then x, 1x. So the smallest one is 1x. So I'm going to do the opposite of that variable, minus 1x. And I do the minus 1x over here. So I'm going to combine like terms here, 7x minus 1x. Well, that's going to be 6x. You take from 7x, you take away 1x, so it's 6. You bring down the plus 4. On the other side, this cancels. 1x minus 1x, that's 0. And you bring down the positive 7. Then you go to step number 2. You are going to eliminate the constants on the same side of the variable. There's the x, so you do the opposite. Minus 4 here, minus 4 over here. So this right here will cancel. And you bring down the 6x right there. And 7 minus 4, that's 3. So now you go to step number 3. Step number 3, you want to isolate the variable. So right now we are multiplying 6 and x. So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to divide by 6 on the left side and the right side. Remember, you want to keep the balance. So whatever you do to one side, you do it to the other side. So this would turn into positive 1. We don't need it. Let me bring down the x, equals. Now guys, right here, the answer is not 2. So be careful when you guys have fractions. You have to simplify fractions. You have to reduce. But you always have to understand what the fraction is. 3 over 6, you guys can simplify by 3, which means you can divide the top and the bottom by 3. You reduce the fraction. So when you reduce the top, let me put the division line right here. 3 divided by 3, well, that's going to be 1. And on the bottom, 6 divided by 3, that's going to be 2. So the answer is 1/2, not 2. And that's a very common mistake where students think the answer is 2, but it's not the same as 1/2. So be careful when you guys reduce, and make sure you always reduce fractions, but you have to be careful when you do that. Now these ones here, notice that they all have parentheses. So now we are going to start doing more things in step number 1. Before, we didn't have parentheses, but we have variables on both sides. So now we do have parentheses, and also we have variables on the left side. There's a variable on the right side, variable on the left, variable on the right. There's a variable here and another variable over here. So we have to distribute, we have to combine like terms. We don't have fractions, so we don't have to worry about that. But we also have to get the variables on the same side of the equation. So let's go ahead and draw the line under the equal sign right here. On the left side, we have to understand the problem first of all. So on the left side, negative 5x minus 10, those are not like terms. We don't have parentheses. We cannot do anything to the left side of the equal sign. But over here, we can distribute the negative, which is this one right here, into the parentheses. Now again, you have to remember that when there's no number in between the negative and the parentheses, or you can say the minus, 2 minus, and there's a parentheses, you actually have an invisible 1. So we are going to distribute that minus 1 or negative 1. Do not subtract these two right here. That's a very common mistake. But you guys cannot do that because order operation, which is PEMDAS, is you multiply before you subtract. And you have to distribute, you have to multiply the negative 1 before you actually subtract the numbers. So I am going to distribute, I'm going to multiply this negative 1 into the x, and then I'm going to distribute the negative 1 into the 4. So first, let's go ahead and bring down the 2 right here. So there's a 2. I'm going to multiply the negative 1 times a positive x. Keep in mind that we do have a positive 1 in front of the x. So negative 1 times positive 1, that's going to be minus 1x. And then I'm going to multiply the negative 1 times a positive 4. That's going to be a minus 4. On the other side, remember we have that negative 5x minus 10. You guys cannot do anything to those two terms. So I am going to bring down the 5, negative 5x minus 10. Now you guys also have to look at the two sides and check if you guys can do anything else in step number 1, which means you combine like terms, or maybe you guys cancel the fractions, or anything that you guys can do. So we don't have fractions here, but I noticed that on the right side, right here, I do have like terms. The 2 and the minus 4, those are constants. So you guys can combine. So I am going to combine this positive 2 and this minus 4. So first of all, let me bring down the negative 1x. I don't need that 1, but I do the negative. I need the negative, so I'm going to put the minus x right here. I will combine the 2 and the minus 4. So that's going to be negative 2. And on the other side, well, remember that negative 5x minus 10, you guys cannot do anything to those two. So you just bring it down. But now, notice that we cannot combine anything else here on the right side, but we do have negative 5x and a minus x on the left side and the right side. So we have to get the variables on the same side. Now you have to understand, remember that one of the things I do is I look for the lowest coefficient of the variable, and that's the one I do the opposite to. So I'm looking at negative 5 here and the minus 1. Remember, we have an invisible 1. But the smallest number, since they're both negatives, the smallest number is negative 5, because negative 5 is further away from 0 on the negative side of the number line. If you imagine a number line. So I'm going to do the opposite of that smallest coefficient. I'm going to do plus 5x here and plus 5x over here. So now you guys are going to cancel the negative 5x plus 5x. You bring down the negative 10. And on the other side, we do have a negative 1x plus a 5x. They're different signs, so you subtract. That's going to be positive 4x. And you bring down the minus 2. Now we can move on to step number 2, because we already combine like terms. We already distribute. We don't have fractions, but we have to get the variable by itself. So the constants on the same side of the variable, there's the variable, the minus 2, you're going to do the opposite. So I'm going to add 2 to both sides right here. Let me bring down the line. And we have negative 8, negative 10 plus 2 is negative 8. On the other side, 4x and the negative 2 and the plus 2 cancel. Now notice that the x is on the right side of the equal sign. So that's okay. You guys can have the x on the left side or the x on the right side. You just have to follow the steps, the 3 steps that I showed you at the beginning of the video. And it doesn't matter where the x is at. As long as it's isolated, you are good. Now the next step, you guys want to, this is step number 3, you want to isolate the variable. So I'm going to divide by 4, and the other side, I'm going to divide by 4. So this right here turns into positive 1. And on the left side, negative 8 divided by 4, positive 4, that's going to be negative 2. I'll bring down the equal sign, and I have an x on the right side. I don't need that 1 next to the x. Now, there's a property called symmetric property that tells you that you can actually switch the order of your answer. And it's more common to have the x on the left side of the equal sign when you have your answer. So this negative 2 equals x can be x equals negative 2 as your answer. So let's go ahead and look at this one here. You guys do have 2 parentheses, one on the left side, one on the right side. Let me just put the line underneath the equal sign. We have to understand the problem. So we do have a negative invisible 1 outside of these parentheses. So I'm going to put a 1 right there so I remember that it is a negative 1. And on the other side, we do have a positive 7 outside of the parentheses. So I'm going to have to multiply, distribute the negative 1 and the 7 for each side of the equation. So let's do the negative 1 first. So I will multiply the negative 1 here times the positive w, which is a positive 1 in front of the w. So that's going to be a negative 1w. We don't need that 1, but I just put it so you guys know it is a negative 1. And I multiply the next one, negative 1 times positive 4, that's negative 4. Now that's on the left side of the equal sign. Now when you move on to the right side, let's go ahead and look what we can do. On the right side again, we do have a 7 outside of the parentheses. So I am going to distribute that 7 into the parentheses. So I'm going to multiply 7 times 1w, that would be 7w. Remember, we're multiplying, 7 times 1 is 7. And you multiply the next one, positive 7 times positive 4. That's going to be positive 28. I'm looking for fractions. I don't have any fractions. I'm going to check if on the left side I have like terms. I don't have like terms. On the right side, I don't have like terms. So I move on to the next step. Oh, before I move on to the next step, I need to get the variables on the same side. So this one, negative 1w, is the smallest variable coefficient with the variable than this one, because positive 7, it's bigger than negative 1. So I'm going to do the opposite of the minus 1. So I'm going to add 1w on the left side, and I'm going to add 1w on the right side. So when that happens, well, we know this right here will cancel. Negative 1 plus 1, 0. Negative 1w plus 1w, 0. They cancel. I'm going to bring down the negative 4. And on the other side, 7w plus 1w, that's 8w. And I'm going to bring down the plus 28. So we do have a variable on one side. It is on the right side, which is fine, but we only have one variable on one side, and that's what we want. Step number 2, you guys are going to eliminate the constants on the same side of the variable. So there's the variable. So this is the constant. So I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to subtract 28 from both sides, minus 28. Let me bring down the line here. So I'm going to have negative 32 on the left side. I'm going to bring down the 8w, and we know this right here will cancel. Positive 28 minus 28 is 0. And the third step, you isolate the variable. So let's divide by 8 and the other side by 8. So we have negative 32 divided by 8, that's negative 4. Bring down the equal sign, and this right here turns into positive 1. We don't need it. 8 divided by 8 is positive 1, but we just put the w. Or remember symmetric property, you can switch the order of the answer. W equals negative 4. And this one here, well, we do the same thing, but we also have to understand the problem. Remember that we do have to use the symmetric property. We can, and this 3 you can multiply by the parentheses. Now the number minus 5, it's outside of the parentheses. So you're not going to multiply by 3 this constant, only what's inside of the parentheses. Same thing on this side of the equal sign. There's a 9 and there's a parenthesis c plus 2. So you are going to multiply all of this inside by 9, but not the plus 1 because that's outside of the parentheses. So let me bring down the line right here. I am going to distribute. So I'm going to multiply 3 times 1. There's the invisible 1c. So that's 3c. I'm going to multiply 3 times negative 8. That will be negative 24. And I bring down the minus 5. I don't multiply by 3 because minus 5 is outside of the parentheses. On the other side, I'm going to multiply the 9 times the 1c right there. So that's going to be 9c. And the 9 times a positive 2. That's positive 18. And then you guys bring down the plus 1. So now you guys have to look for what else can you do on the left side and the right side. So let's go ahead and look on the left side. On the left side, I don't have fractions, but I do have like terms. The ones that are like terms are the constants, the minus 24 and the minus 5. Those are like terms. They don't have variables, so we can combine. They have the same sign, so we have to add the numbers and keep the sign. So let me bring down the 3c first. 3c, and then I'm going to get negative when I combine negative 24 minus 5. That's negative 29. And on the other side, once again, I don't have any fractions. I don't have parentheses, but I do have like terms, the 18 and the 1. Those are like terms. So I am going to combine the plus 18 and the plus 1. So let me bring down the 9c first, and then 18 plus 1 is 19. So we are not done with step number 1 yet because we still have a variable on the left side and the right side. So the smallest coefficient with the variable is the 3c. So that's what I want. I want to get the variables on the same side. So I'm going to subtract 3c, which is the opposite of positive 3c. And you subtract 3c over here. So we know this will cancel. Positive 3c minus 3c, 0. Let me bring down the negative 29 right here. There's the line. On the other side, 9c minus 3c. Well, that's going to be 6c. And let me bring down the plus 19. Now you guys can move on to step number 2 because we don't have like terms here. We don't have parentheses. We cannot do anything else. And we only have 1c on one side. And the right side is fine, guys. Remember, it's okay. But we want, step number 2, we want to eliminate the constants on the same side of the variable. So I am going to subtract that 19, which is the opposite of positive 19. Subtract 19 over here. So we are going to cancel this right here. And we get negative 48 on the left side. Let me just bring this one down. 6c on the right side. And moving on to step number 3, you isolate the variable. So I am going to divide by 6 here. Divide by 6 over here. Let me just move this a little bit up. And you guys are going to have negative 8. Bring down the equal sign. Negative 48 divided by 6 is negative 8. And we do have a positive 1 here. We don't need it. And we have a c. Or you can say c equals negative 8. Alright guys, I will do a second part of this lesson, a second video. So make sure you guys check that out. The next video is going to include fractions, it's going to include the Symmetric property, and combining like terms. So make sure you guys look for that video. And if you guys like my videos, make sure you guys hit that like button. You can also subscribe to my channel. Make sure you guys practice as well, and I'll see you guys later.